This week on In Post, we're going to tear the covers off the ON1 Perfect Effects Color Enhancer filter. Hi everybody, my name is Scott Davenport and welcome back to In Post. This week I'm answering one of your questions, actually a very long-standing question from my friend Eve about the color enhancer filter in Perfect Effects. So Eve, this one's specifically for you. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this though. So without further ado, let's dive right in and take a look at what this filter can do. So here we are in Perfect Effects, and let's add ourselves a color enhancer filter. So I'll choose Color Enhancer from the filter pull down, and let me hide the navigator with Command 1 or Control 1 on a PC so we can see all the different sections. So the Color Enhancer has three main sections. We've got temperature, tint, and vibrance to change the warmth or the coolness of an image. Touch up the tint. You can either make things more magenta, more green, or add vibrance. Now the auto button is, you click that and it tries to do its best to remove color casts. So if I were to turn that off, you'll see that this image is a little warmer. I turn it back on and the suite is deciding these blues look a little washed out. Let me try and add some coolness back in to bring those blues back in. Next section we have is color range, and this is where you can control hue, saturation, and brightness of all the colors in the image or any individual color channel. And lastly we have is purity, and this reduces saturation in the shadows and the highlights. It protects the highlights or the shadows from these other settings that you've made. Lastly we have just the presets. There's a whole slew of presets that are in here, and these are just pre-canned settings for the various sliders, and the default is auto color, which is our auto button. So if you're a Lightroom user, you're probably asking yourself, well, isn't this the basic panel with a couple of things from hue, saturation, and luminance? And you're right. So why use the color enhancer? The main thing is if you're doing adjustments for the image as a whole, vibrance overall, or boosting greens everywhere or blues everywhere, it's perfectly fine to do that in Lightroom. Where I like to use the ON1 filters is when I need to do those selectively. The filter and radials and the brushes and so forth in Lightroom, they offer saturation, but for every color range, not for specific color ranges. And so that's where the power of the ON1 tool comes in. You can be very specific and very targeted with these color changes. So now what does each slider do? Let's use this image as an example and just start playing around. So temperature, this should be very familiar if you've used any type of photo editing software. I'm going to pull this way down and make the image very cool, so I'm adding more blues and increasing the blues, toning down oranges and reds, and then the reverse. I can go in the opposite direction with warmth, and everything is getting much warmer. These greens are becoming more greenish yellow. The blues are nearly gone; they're getting faded out, and that's what temperature does. Tint, same thing. You can push things more toward the magenta side of things. I'll go extreme here, and we can see that's looking terrible. And then greens, we're going to see like a greenish cast over the entire image. And lastly is vibrance. Now vibrance is, think of it like intelligent saturation. We have saturation down here for the different color ranges, but here you have overall vibrance for the scene. And it's going to add richness in color for areas that are muted. So colors that are already vibrant aren't going to change as much. Let me push this to the extreme. And you're going to see, okay, the sky finally started to pick up some more blue when I really push this to 100%, and then of course the rocks and the cliffs are over the top. But as I back this off, up until I got to, let's see, 28% or so, you weren't seeing any change in the blues. These blues were relatively vibrant to begin with. They weren't muted, they weren't dull. And that's what vibrance is all about, whereas saturation, let's do that slider, where I'm going to affect all the colors. Saturation will do everything. And then you can see it very immediately. This is getting, not looking so good. It's way oversaturated. But this is going to do everything, all the shadows, all the highlights, and colors that are already reasonably rich in the image will just be pushed even farther. Now in the color range area, as I mentioned, we have all, which means you can adjust every single color all at once, changing saturation, changing brightness. When I work with the color enhancer, I tend to want to target certain color ranges. For example, there is some moss in the rocks here. I would like that to be more green. So I can open up, number one, the yellows channel and nudge the hue a little more toward green. And we're going to see that these are getting much greener. We're also picking up a lot more green in the background, and this is where our masking tools come in to remove some of the effects. I'm not going to go through masking today, but one of the advantages of using the ON1 suite is you can be very selective about where the color gets applied. And then also we could change the green channel and bump up saturation. And so that's getting much greener here. I hit the backslash key so you can see before and after. Now I've adjusted 2 sliders and I've made this, these rocks look much greener. Background looks terrible, so we're not going to keep that. So let me reset. Okay. And then last, of course, is brightness. And so again, you can do it for the image overall, and this is effectively right now a level of adjusting exposure, or you can do it for individual color channels. Like let's say aqua. If I wanted to make the aquas darker, we're going to see a little bit of change in the ocean. I can do the same thing with the blue channel. Make those darker. You're going to see the blues become a little bit darker. This is kind of subtle. I tend not to play with brightness very often. More often I will work with saturation or with hue. One other example we can use in this image for hue and saturation. Take the blue channel, which is primarily our skies and the ocean. We could nudge this more toward twilight, taking the blues and moving them toward a purplish feel. This is not going to work very well for this image because it's obviously taken in daylight. You can also make that more saturated. And I'll push this really far so you can see what's going on here. You can see the ocean and the sky is changing from a blue tone to a purplish tone. This is a nice little trick to use for twilight or nighttime photography, because sometimes we want to get a little more purplish tones into the skies, and this works really, really well. So incidentally, if you're still unclear about what the difference between hue and saturation is, I have a different video that covers that in its entirety in much more depth. So you can go check that out. I'll put a link into the video in the comments below. And then last but not least, I mentioned the purity, which protects the color changes from your shadows or from your highlights. So let's take the color range of all and we'll crank up saturation, all the way up to 100%. And so we're seeing, saturation everywhere. And I think I'm looking at these shadowy areas here, here, in this background here. If I take the purity and say, I want to keep the shadows pure, and I start pushing this up and pushing this up and pushing this up, you can see it backing off from all these different areas as I go farther and farther. I go back down, I pay attention to these rocks here in the foreground. I'm going to push shadows back up again, and you can see I'm starting to back off the saturation from the deepest shadows and then into the low midtones, and then all on up all the way through the midtones, and effectively then everything. I rarely end up using purity, not because it's not a good thing to have in the toolbox, just rarely had to use it. More often than not, I've set my white points, my black points over in Lightroom before coming into the photo suite and just haven't had the need to use it. So the one last piece I haven't talked about is the little eyedropper here. And this is to help out with the auto settings. So I said that, auto is going to try to locate color casts, and the eyedropper can help out by choosing, some areas supposed to be neutral gray. And I've also found sometimes you can just choose something that's very white. Like this here in the ocean. This ocean foam should be white. And so if I click on that, we're going to see that it makes some level of adjustment based on it. You can see it effectively turned off the auto setting and left the temperature, the tint, and the vibrance flat. I had done my white and black point adjustment before coming into the photo suite. But to show how this might work, if you were to choose an area like, I'll just say here, we're going to see a very different result. I'm telling the color enhancer, this is what I want you to treat as neutral. And so, which this being very, very hot, it backed everything off and gave it a whole bunch of coolness to kind of counteract what is really a very warm orange yellow tone. And so it said I need to reverse that. I need to pull that away from this bright warm tone you're telling me is the neutral point and add in this cool temperature. So if you don't like what the auto setting is doing, and I tend to turn it off because I've done the adjustments somewhere else. But you can also use this eyedropper, find something that should be neutral gray, or in this case pure white, click on it, and you'll get some settings. So that is the color enhancer filter in ON1 Perfect Effects. And that's also the end of this week's In Post. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, shoot me a like, a +1, forward this to a friend, subscribe to the channel. I'd love to get more of your questions. They're great because that helps me give you some content that's very meaningful to you and very apropos for wherever you are in your journey in photography. Until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and thanks very much.